Data Sharks, everybody. We're super excited to have Drew Banin from Dbt Labs. He's one of the co-founders of Dbt, which is what I like to call a secret giant in the data management space. You know, people may have not heard about it, but then they'll find out they're using it within their
Becoming less
deployment.
secret all the time, by the way.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us, Drew.
Yeah, Jared, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So one of the first questions I like to ask, especially founders, co-founders, is, what does the world look like without DBT? I go through a deployment. What does it end up looking like?
Yeah, great question. There are kind of two things that we've seen. This is sort of changing as DBT is becoming more of the default in the modern data stack. But kind of prior to that happening, we would see people not treating transformation as a first-class part of their data architecture. And so that either meant that it was coupled with data loading in sort of an ETL sort of way. So you'd extract data from source, transform it, in Spark or Python. Sometimes people use R for stuff like that. Load it into a data warehouse. In that realm, we also would see the transformation logic being pushed downstream into like BI or analytics use cases. So you'd have these 1,000-line SQL queries that were copied and pasted, and so you were transforming the data, but you were doing it at reporting time. And the challenge there is, of course, like managing consistency across these different reports. So your logic changes, and now you've got 87 dashboards to update. That was kind of one model where people weren't really doing this at all. The other thing that we saw a lot of was people building their own homegrown versions of DBT. So I think we've talked to, just dozens and dozens of people that had engineers on their team working on, tools that you could define SQL statements in JSON files, and then they got put into Mongo, and then there's a node script that it was very like convoluted, but it was a part-time job for someone on, an engineering team. And so it was never resourced, in quite the same way that we can resource building DBT. So we saw a lot of that, and really it's a lot of those folks migrating from homegrown tools into DBT that we've seen over the years.
So it ultimately reduces the footprint of the code, right? Because we're not having to repeat so many different segments of code, right?
Yeah, exactly. The example I always give at our onboarding sessions for new employees, I talk about what DBT is. I talk about like a fictional e-commerce business that's operating in the US. And so all the reporting, is based on USD. And then they expand to, London, and now they've got pounds. And so if you have to update every report to do currency conversion, it's a whole lot of work. It's easy to miss things. You later expand into France or Germany, and now you've got euros. And so being able to centralize this logic into a transformation layer, what you actually do is you present, an abstraction over your source data. So maybe you have 10 different tables with different currencies and time zones and product variants and things like that. DBT provides an opportunity to normalize that data into this like transform format. And you just present an order called, you present a table called orders, to your BI tool. And that's where you encode all the logic. So if you start operating in a new country, you just incorporate that logic into this abstraction in your sort of dimensional models. And then your BI tool really has no idea that anything's changed, because it's just selecting from the same data with new logic in it.
Awesome. So now tell us how this all got started. Give us the early inception story of how DBT came to be.
Okay. I was born in that's too far back. Yeah, so actually it does go kind of far back. I went to college here in Philadelphia. I'm in Philadelphia right now. Called Drexel University, my undergrad, and I was studying computer science. My college had this kind of interesting program. We called it a co-op, and so I had a few different opportunities to go and sort of intern with companies for 6 months at a time. I got class credit for it. It's a big part of the program there.
Right.
So one of these co-ops, I worked at a Philly-based startup called RJ Metrics back then, and it was just sort of an all-in-one BI tool. So it would, load data from your different sources. You could apply transformations, had built-in dashboarding, reporting, and that was, it was probably 2015, 2016. I was doing like kind of marketing ops, some data stuff on the marketing team, and my boss was Tristan Handy, the CEO here at Dbt Labs. So I got to know him. Connor was an engineer on the team. He was he's our CTO now. Janessa is our head of marketing. So it was kind of this group of people. We all, Aaron, our head of customer success, I keep forgetting people. Worked with all these people at RJ Metrics. I was the intern. I was like 21 years old. And so it's at this time when we start seeing the emergence of data warehouses. So Redshift comes on the market, and we see tools like Mode and Looker, and we're seeing this all-in-one, BI platform be deconstructed into sort of the underpinnings of the modern data stack. And so at that time, RJ Metrics, to their credit, realized that the future is going to be like ELT in a sense. Like, let's build a really good data pipeline that can get data from your data sources, put it into a data warehouse. So we started working on this kind of bare bones data pipeline. And at that time, we were playing around in this new world. And so we had, I think it was Redshift, we had data loaded into it. We were trying to report on it, and I think it was Mode back then. And it was really painful. We wanted to do the reporting, but we had all the challenges that we just talked about of sort of encoding the transformation into the reporting step. And so we started kicking around this tool that could build views inside of Redshift. His name's Chris. I actually can't remember his exact role. It was a long time ago, but Chris came up with the name Dbt. Which is funny. We named it after Scala build tool. It was kind of we thought of it in a similar way. So SBT, Dbt. And the origins of Dbt, it was Apache 2 licensed open source software from the beginning. We started building it in the RJ Metrics days, and eventually RJ Metrics got acquired by Magento first, and then the data pipeline product spun out into Stitch Data. And we became Fishtown Analytics. Tristan, Connor, and I started, as a consultancy. But we were working on Dbt every step of the way and giving it away as OSS.
So you knew you were going to kind of stay that route, keep that route, and then have the consulting side, but you leverage the Dbt assets that you're doing to kind of work the consulting side. Was the plan to kind of keep that as the thing, or was the plan like, hey, we're going to go product, we're going to become a product company? Was it one or the other?
Yeah, it's funny how we remember these things. I was digging through my inbox the other day, and I found a note from Tristan. Sent me an email. I'm like, it was 2016. It was the early days of consulting. And he said something like, there's a real product here. Like, this is a special thing. I really admire his foresight, because I was so green. I didn't really understand the opportunity or the need for Dbt or how the industry would evolve. But Tristan, he's a wise. I wouldn't say a wise guy, but I mean it in the good way.
in a good way.
Yeah. So he definitely saw it, and we did consulting. I credit those days with a lot of the design decisions and philosophy behind Dbt. We had this really interesting consulting model where we worked on these 2-week sprints. So we got companies to sign these statements of work where it outlined, we'll do 5 points of sprint work over the next 2 weeks, and the contract will auto renew at the end of that period until either party cancels it.
Right.
And so we wanted to work with a lot of different companies. We wanted to make this stuff as standardized as possible. And one of the important things is we didn't bill for hours, we built for value delivered. And so in Dbt, we were thinking how can we automate this as much as possible so that we can really understand the business, what they're trying to get out of the data, what they need to know. And spend a lot less time on writing the boilerplate SQL that isn't differentiated or helpful. So we really fed a lot of the things we learned in consulting back into Dbt, the product. It's we have this functionality called snapshots. You can capture type 2 slowly changing dimensions. That came out of conversations with folks. We used it in consulting a bunch.
That's cool.
Yeah, a lot of that.
That is cool. So how did you know that when you said that Tristan, he kind of had identified that. How did you find out that this was going to be something special beyond what Tristan thought? Like, when did it hit you that this was really a product?
Yeah. So this summer we started Fishtown Analytics. I had just graduated from college, just between the four of us. I had planned to work at RJ Metrics full time, and then they got acquired, and the intern didn't surprisingly have a role at Magento, and that's okay. Worked out. So I started working with Tristan. I would go to his home office a couple of times a week. We'd jam on DBT and consulting and figure out like, how do we do marketing attribution on Looker and Redshift, and that was pretty fun. It was pretty innovative. After that summer, we were mostly just spending time on Zoom together. I was at home, he was at home, and so I thought I'd move to New York City and see what's going on in Brooklyn. And so that's sort of when everything started to feel extremely real. We were still only making DBT open source. There was no paid software product anyone could buy. But I met to meet like a lot of companies across Manhattan. Talked to a lot of data teams like Casper. They hosted the first Dbt Meetup. Everyone on their team is fantastic, and I keep in touch with a lot of them.
That's cool.
Yeah, and so they were big proponents. They spread the gospel of DBT in New York. And the moment it started to hit me was I would take the subway around New York City, and I would see advertisements in the subway. And I could point at the different advertisements, and I thought, they use DBT, they use DBT, they use DBT. So it was, it was that experience where I thought, oh gosh, this is something starting to take off. Yeah.
Yeah. That is cool. I love that. All right. So now what have been some of the big inflection points of the organization itself? So now I would love to hear, I'm sure you've got several, but I would love to hear the inflection point also of going from, just purely Apache DBT to, hey, how do we produce a revenue model out of this? I'd love to hear those thoughts too.
Yeah. So I think the first inflection point was when we hired a full-time engineer to work on DBT. So it was, we all did consulting work. It was Connor and I and a bunch of others, and Connor and I would split our time like doing consulting and building the product. Eventually we had a big enough consulting team that we could afford to hire a non-revenue generating software engineer. Like it was hard to explain to my family at Thanksgiving what we were doing. Like, yeah, we're paying this person money to give away software, but that's
especially if you're giving it away. It's like, how do I pay this guy?
Yeah, but we invested a ton of energy into being really helpful in the DBT community. So we stood up a Slack channel. A lot of people trickled in, and we just talked about the problems they were looking to solve, how DBT could help, what we were seeing happening in the ecosystem. It was like a very exciting time where new products were springing up, and we were trying to figure out how they all fit together and what the boundaries are.
What year was that point that you hired your first like main developer?
I think it might have been maybe late 2017, early 2018, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Wow.
I think that's right. I'd have to double check. It's been a little bit of a blur, to be honest. So that's kind of inflection point number one. We had dedicated, we were dedicating energy towards DBT core open source. The community kept growing. By the end of 2019, we crossed this threshold of sort of members in the DBT community and companies that we knew of using DBT open source. And I think concurrently we had been putting together this hosted offering for DBT, attempting to monetize it. So we called it Cinter. I thought it was a good name, but we moved on from it. Sintering is like, it's this metallurgic process where glass sheet, metal powder. So, it's the idea. So we were trying to sell Center. I think Connor, our CTO, was doing sales back then. I was doing customer support. In addition to us like still working on building all the stuff. And by the end of 2019, we started to take this hosted product really seriously. It eventually, morphed into DBT Cloud, and that was kind of the biggest inflection point for us. I think it's when we said we're going to be a software company, and here's how we're going to do it.
So how does that break off, like, with where it's DBT Cloud versus the Apache project? Like,
Yeah,
what is it that, draws people to the cloud offering?
sure. So we put a lot of thought into the decision criteria for what we open
Mhm.
source versus what we make proprietary.
Yeah.
We've been really very consistent with it over the years, and it's been helpful because if every time you want to build a feature, you have to think really hard
Yeah.
about where it goes. It's a real tax. So DBT Core is all about SQL compilation, connecting data warehouses. Sort of, if you treat DBT as a language, like those constructs, we want to be open source. It comes from kind of a principled place. Like, who wants to use a programming language that they can't take with them?
Right.
So sort of all that goes into the open source realm. Things like statefulness, identity and access control, user experience. Those are things that we want to put in the cloud product because we're better able to deliver them. We can deploy DBT Cloud multiple times per day. DBT Core,
Right.
we put 8 weeks of work into each release. It's
Right.
installed
Right.
software. Yeah.
And so, and how does that revenue model work, right? So, is it a subscription plan that they're subscribing to on a yearly basis? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so we call it a sort of barbell model.
Mhm.
We care a lot about making DBT work for data teams of one and the Fortune 100 and
Mhm.
everyone in between.
Mhm.
So if anyone can sign up for DBT Cloud, it's free to get started. There's a 2-week trial where you can kind of use everything. After that, you can make the decision to either be on the developer tier, which is free for one user. You can use it as much as you want, sort of individually. There's also a team tier, which is $50 per user per month.
Mhm.
Pretty affordable.
Mhm.
And then beyond that, there's this enterprise tier, which comes with like a lot of the enterprise security and sort of compliance things that bigger companies need. And so there tends to be a bit of a spectrum where we have a lot of these self-service customers that they punch in a credit card number and pay month to month.
Mhm.
We also have these sort of enterprise tier customers that that tend to be a lot larger, more sophisticated. They get more support from our team, things like that. There's not too much in the middle. We find that folks are
Yeah.
either looking to get started or scaling out.
And
Yeah,
does one of the things that I've noticed, having worked in the consulting space quite some time, is it's always hard to go from, zero to your first dollar, right? It's that 0 to 1 concept that's, um, how did you do that? Like, what was the first dollar? How did that, where it was like they were buying the product? What did that look
the
like?
product. Yeah. Um, in the earliest days, we if we told our consulting clients that we were going to use Redshift and Looker and DBT, they would have said, "Hang on a second, what's DBT?" Yeah, it's like, "Hey, here's the repo, check it out." So we did use it to deliver the work, but sort of once it started getting more traction, people actually
Right.
reached out to us and said, like, "We want you to implement DBT for us." Whereas before it was just one of the tools in the toolkit.
Sort of the back end.
Um, yeah, in terms of pure software revenue, um, we started with a relatively um, I'm trying to remember what we called it internally, even before Center, but a relatively simple hosted product that would run
Mhm.
your DBT jobs on a schedule.
Mhm.
So there were folks that were running DBT on cron or on Airflow, and it's a little bit challenging because getting insight into what's happening with these DBT runs
Mhm.
in front of the people who are like responsible for writing the code is challenging if you need to like SSH into a server and check out the cron tab, to
Right.
edit
Right.
the cadence. Um, so that's sort of how it started. I think that's probably where we got our first paying customer from, and they probably paid us $50. Yeah, to start.
But hey, it's a 0 to 1. That's all. That's really all that matters. If you can create the revenue out of it.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the features that you've either deployed recently or that you're deploying in the future? What are some of the things you're excited about now and in the future?
Yeah, it's funny. There are different kinds of things that are exciting to me in different ways. So one of the bigger things that we did over the course of the past year is we invested a ton of energy into making DBT a lot faster we call it parsing DBT projects. So there was a time when most DBT projects had 50 models in it.
Yeah.
But as adoption has grown and people are using it for more and more sophisticated use cases across bigger teams, we've seen people with 5,000 plus model DBT projects.
Wow.
So this was one of those sort of cringe moments for me, but there was I think it might have been at Coalesce, our community conference, more than a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody got up on stage and said, we really love DBT. Here are all the great things it does, but here's one problem. It takes 5 minutes between when I press DBT run and DBT starts running my code.
Yeah.
I just wanted to melt into my chair. I was so embarrassed. So we put an incredible amount of energy into it, and our goal was, we said, 5 minutes isn't going to cut it. We need it to happen in less than 5 seconds. There's 17 different things that went into it. We ended up getting right there. The goal we actually set was 1 second per 1,000 models, basically.
Nice.
Got there. So that was really exciting to me. It was I never want people to outgrow DBT, right? I want us to scale with these projects, and
right.
And so that motivates a lot of interesting work. One of the things I'm thinking about is, at some point, you don't want to just keep stuffing models into an ever-growing project. How can we better facilitate splitting these projects up into different pieces that can be managed independently and depend on each other, and kind of have a more mature programming model around things like that.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you have to do 10,000 of anything, it's going to be relatively slow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
In those types of clients where it is a really large code base, have they come up with tactics for just sort of being able to manage that many that many jobs?
Yeah. So one of the things you can do today is we call them packages. They're basically just DBT projects, but the idea is it's a package if you're importing it.
Yeah.
So trying to create more of a module system. We've got a lot of the right primitives in place, but some of the things we're thinking about right now are how to deliver, ultimately this experience where, as an end user, really, okay, the scenario where we see it is there's a couple of different teams. There's maybe one team that's responsible for anonymizing data or redacting PII or something like that, and they have privileged access in a data warehouse, and they want to present this data to downstream teams of people aligned with different parts of the business or doing data science, what have you. So you can do that today, but some of the ergonomics aren't quite there, and that's sort of where we need to put the most work in. But the end goal is, you could make a project that just sort of extends something that someone else did upstream, and that's going to be the goal for us, I think.
Right. Cool. So effort wise, if someone's new to DBT, what's the effort in getting deploying DBT into an environment?
Yeah. There's sort of two modes. So if you've never used DBT before, in fact, what we see sometimes is people are coming to data warehousing for the first time, can actually be a little bit intimidating. It's you need a data warehouse, you need a data loader, you need a BI tool, you need DBT. You sort of need all these things just to get started. So I'm grateful for a lot of the really good resources out there that are explaining here are the different tools and here's how they fit together.
Yeah.
I think that's important for sort of end users to internalize. For DBT specifically, if you sign up for DBT Cloud, you you punch in your data warehouse information, you connect to Git repository, and you can start writing code. Alternatively, you can use DBT open source. It looks like, pip install DBT or brew install DBT, more or less. And yeah, you can get started coding. To us, the open source thing is really cool because, we're seeing this as we grow. If we want to use a new tool, it has to go through sort of security review. We have to make sure we can connect it to our data warehouse. And so open source is an awesome way for people to just like kick the tires, get a feel for it. Yeah, decide that they like it, they want to use it. I think it's a great way to sort of distribute it and get people to experience sort of the DBT programming model and paradigm.
Do you ever find that people that are trying to kick the tires with the free version, like, they're reaching out to you to, like, hey, like, how do I get this to work? But it's like, okay, well, you're using the free version, and how do you support people that are using a free version? That's a tricky task.
Jared, I got a question kind of along that line.
Sorry,
Slack,
yeah, and that's I wanted to ask Drew also, because I actually, I'm not just on Data Sharks. I actually use DBT, but it's really cool. There's some really cool things. But when I was first getting started, one of the things that was huge for me, not just with how do I do this, but also what are some of the cool things that I can do, was the community. So I was just kind of interested, Drew, how did you guys build up that community? Talk a little bit about that process for me, because it's an amazing community. I mean, the Slack channel is, it's fun. It's super informative. People are very, very responsive out there, and it's obviously part of the culture that you guys have helped build. So.
Yeah, it's a great question, Rich, and it's exactly where I was going to take this. I think the first and most important thing to say is we consider ourselves participants in the DBT community. I spent just an inordinate amount of time in the DBT Slack as we were getting DBT off the ground. Zero expectation that anyone would pay us anything ever for DBT. I just wanted them to be successful with it. I wanted to learn how they thought about these things and what they were trying to do and why that was important. I think that I'm grateful for it every day. The way that the community has grown, we've really kept that sense of helpfulness, and a lot of us on the DBT Labs team try to stick around in there. We've got folks on a sort of dedicated community team, try to be helpful out in Slack, make sure there are good resources for people.
Is that how you built that community, is just by being sure that you guys were frontlining it, or did you just have certain companies or people that were just all over it?
The thing we always said is, like, our community function tried to answer the question, how can we be helpful to the community? Like, what does the community need from us right now? Yeah. Truthfully, in the early days of DBT, like, installation was hard. There were a lot of bugs. We've always had pretty good documentation, but it's gotten a lot better than it was when we started. So it was actually kind of funny. I think that because it was a little bit quirky, people needed to join the DBT Slack to say, how do I do this thing? And then we got them hooked on analytics engineering from there. But no, it's one of those things where we stood up the Slack. We tried to be authentic and sincere and helpful to everyone who joined. And we still see it. Like, there's a lot of people in the community supporting other people. And I think a big part of it is there's this evolution that's happening around analytics engineering as sort of either a job description or a job title, depending on how you think about it. And so a lot of people are going through this kind of transformation in their own roles, and they've benefited from someone, showing them the way. And I think that a lot of them are kind of paying it forward to others. I think that's like a really beautiful, powerful thing, and that's the thing I'm grateful for.
Drew, we completely agree. There is definitely an evolution. I would even say it's a bit of a revolution going on. You touched on, an evolution of BI tools. So business objects, MicroStrategy, Cognos, obviously still really big BI tools. And then you've got Mode and Looker that are in place. If you think about ETL, we also have really big ETL tools that are in place. And the reason that large organizations don't want to necessarily switch away from those tools is because it encapsulates knowledge and it encapsulates skills. And moving to DBT requires you to write really good SQL as well. So what are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of the ETL to ELT move and sort of the perfect timing of when DBT entered the marketplace, of where this was sort of the gap that was missing?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of it comes down to lock-in, I want to say. I saw this written up really well in an article I read the other day. If you can build a product that convinces customers that they're not locked in to what you're providing, then they actually want to invest more in you. They want to give you more of their workloads because they're not worried about you, shutting down the service or jacking up the rates or whatever it is. So to me, it feels like a lot of this is, okay, one way of saying it is a bias away from lock-in as sort of the core strategy. Like, give us all your stuff and we're going to keep it here. Another way of saying it is it's about composability. So if you want to use multiple different tools to explore data, that's incredibly reasonable. There are tools that are better at exploratory analysis or dashboarding or data science, what have you, like metric reporting. So to me, it feels like a real boon to the whole industry to be able to compose these tools together and actually, not try to find the one tool that can do everything, but have a best of breed solution that can solve varied and diverse needs.
We completely agree. I think still there's a SQL gap in terms of SQL knowledge. So a lot of times it's not DBT challenge. It's how do I write a type 2 transformation or a CDC transformation, and how do I deal with those kinds of things? We've approached it from sort of building patterns and building automations that we can generate. So one layer of abstraction away from DBT, generating DBT templates and models. And so we're trying to approach it from that perspective. But it is an incredible thing to see large organizations that are typically shy of adopting open source tools adopting DBT. It's quite exciting.
Yeah. And one of the cool things is DBT fits almost into this data infrastructure bucket, where if you look at data infrastructure more broadly, it's you see open source technology or even just technology infrastructure, right? It's Docker, it's Kubernetes, it's Kafka. Nobody wants to be locked into something proprietary for this thing that underpins the whole function. So I think that's one of the places where being open source really helps us, and we'd actually probably have a harder go of it if we were totally proprietary.
Do you ever see situations where someone has, with the open source version, generated an enormous environment and like it's almost like a gold mine for you guys to just onboard them into your cloud, right? So I mean, have you seen that happen where a lot of time and effort has been spent in the open source version and you're basically converting them over to the paid model?
Yeah, we totally see that, and it goes hand in hand with what a proof of value looks like at a very large company with sophisticated needs. It's a beautiful thing when folks show up and say, like, we've already evaluated DBT, we already know what we want. Here are the things we need. It's single sign-on, it's role-based access control, it's audit logging, and we're going to have X users logging in to use the IDE, right? Like, yeah, it's incredible. I will say, like, just because we talked about community earlier, we care a lot about investing in the community and DBT open source just in and of itself. We think they're inherently valuable. Like, we don't have
practically a
metrics
pre-sales
around.
arm.
So that's the important thing. It's like,
yeah,
okay, this is true. People use DBT open source. They eventually come to us and say, we want to buy your cloud product. But we try hard not to look at it that way. The thing that we've done to date is just like invest energy, make the experience really good. We have these clear lines around what DBT open source is versus what DBT cloud is. We feel good about those lines. And just, it's hard to, measure the conversion rate. And so we don't even try. It's like, that's not the goal, actually. Like, people will come. I think that's I think that's kind of a beautiful thing,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm glad we've kept with us as we've grown. I think it's been a big part of our success.
Now, and I try to make sure that I'm asking questions that someone who never even heard of this would ask. Like, for example, if I have deployed it in the open source and I need to get into the cloud, is it like that, or is there a process that I'm moving through to get there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm like resisting the urge to actually. I'm going to snap too. It is like that. You connect your data warehouse, you connect your Git repository. This is one of the big sort of ideas behind DBT is, we should treat SQL like it's code, like it's a code asset. It should be version controlled. You should code review it. There should be testing and documentation, and DBT supports all these things. So yeah, if your code's in a Git repo, you can import it in the cloud, and truly within a couple minutes, maybe you open up and you allow traffic through the DBT cloud IP address to your warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. Yeah, you can start scheduling runs to happen every hour, send notifications to Slack or email on failure, and pop into the IDE and start editing.
When you were building out the cloud version, was it pretty obvious kind of what features you wanted to segregate to the cloud versus, what were you going to keep in open source?
Yeah, really, it really came down to this decision around open source being about the language, sort of SQL compilation, database adapters. It's very different shipping. DBT core, DBT open source is stateless. So you run DBT, it'll look at all your code, it'll run stuff, and then the process stops. It's very different shipping something like that in an open source environment compared to, a long-lived service with storage backends, and you need to host it with high availability and performance requirements, right? Like, it's actually significantly harder to do that. And we have an engineering team that's very well suited to do it, but it's much easier to build that in a proprietary capacity where you kind of have control over the whole environment. So to us, it's stuff like state and identity and login and auth. Like, these are all the things that become proprietary. And then specifically, once we build that platform, you can start building, these sort of more differentiated experiences on top of DBT in the web context, because DBT open source it's a command line only tool. But yeah, DBT Cloud, we can deliver an IDE for people to write code. We can leverage metadata to show you the performance of your DBT runs in the context of history, or this is actually a newly released thing that we think is pretty exciting. We call it like a bottlenecks visualization. So if your run takes an hour, you can kind of look and see like, oh, well, there's one model that's a bottleneck.
Here it is. Yeah.
38 minutes, right? So we can deliver experiences like that in cloud much more readily than we can in open source.
When you went to go generate your cloud IDE, we got Rich back.
We're getting ready for the nor'easter, so the internet had to drop. So
I think your cat's been chewing on your internet cable.
No, she's right here.
All right. When you decided, to build out that IDE, this is one of the things I have noticed. Consulting organizations that build elegant backend systems often struggle to produce the front end because they're really good at the back end, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a sexy front end. So how did you approach this? Did you was it just a matter of going hiring someone and said, make an interface to this, or how did you get to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very funny because we've been in business for 5.5 years, working on DBT for about 6 all in. A lot of this stuff happened later in our lifetime as a company, where like as a business we felt a little bit more mature, but we were still pretty early in being a software company.
Yeah.
So I think we had either 2 or 3 full-time engineers when we decided to build an IDE.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like total, which was, it's a real challenge building an IDE. And
I know.
we've got a lot of work to do still.
We know.
Yeah, we know this. It's very challenging. If you're going to be really good at building the stuff that you know you're good at, but once you have to traverse like what does it look like for a person that might not be a total expert to look at this? How did you get there? Like, what did you do?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking. I think the first version of it we called it was like a slip of the tongue from a designer we were working with. I think he said the words Natalie Reportman, and I thought it was so funny. and so the prototype, the first version, we called Natalie Reportman, which like is a Natalie portmanteau,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So,
that's funny.
So that we built it the same way we built everything else. We had a designer we were working with. They were contracted. We were still really in the infancy of the shift from consultancy to product company. And we mocked out some wireframes. We started implementing it, and really fast forwarding to today, we've got I think about 60 folks in engineering, and we're realizing like, okay, well, to take the next step on this IDE, we sort of need dedicated teams that are focusing on these different components. So we're expecting like step change improvements in a lot of different parts of DBT Cloud, and it really comes from our ability to resource these different products effectively. Just going back to we want DBT to work with teams of 1 or 100, and there are very different needs of those kinds of teams, and a lot of considerations. And so it's ultimately very exciting to sort of have the resources to put behind this stuff.
I bet.
It was pretty tough when there were 3 of us thinking about the whole surface area. There's
now,
a lot more
do you software companies have different ways of reaching customers, right? So take like Snowflake, they have an entire sales team, enterprise sales, very like sort of forward into getting it into the accounts and things like that. Other organizations like we spoke with SQL DBM, they're not that at all. They're the demand just basically comes to them. So what kind of model do you guys use in terms of getting to your customers? Is it what we've been talking about, just with, hey, people try it and then they buy it, or do you actually use sales teams to go out?
Oh yeah. We certainly have a sales team. We think both motions are really important. We care a lot about self-service. Like, I hate when I see a cool product and I have to talk to someone to kick the tires. So yeah,
we do too, by the way. Yeah. So this is something that Jared and I talk about a lot. So transparency in pricing and easily being able to sort of log into a website and start using it right away is important.
Try it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So we want people to be able to sign up for cloud, start using it for free, get value out of it, make a decision to upgrade, invite their team members, things like that. We care a lot about the health of sort of that motion. At the same time, we certainly have a sales team. They are they're crushing it. That's all I can say. But they're just like, they're amazing people. Like individually, I like spending time with them so much because they're spanning, the depth of data transformations and warehousing, but they're also able to speak to sort of the business needs with some of these customers. So it's sort of a dual motion there, and we care about both of them, and think that our business will be healthiest if kind of both of those are growing independently.
For sure. So are there any questions that I haven't asked that I should have asked?
I have one, Jared, if I may.
Okay.
Drew, in terms of the partner ecosystem, so a lot of times I think the customer and the community has grown quite a bit. What's happening on the partner ecosystem? Folks that want to build things with DBT and add capabilities to DBT, what's happening in that space?
Yeah, we're seeing some really compelling integrations over the past 6 to 12 months. There's one really big unlock has been this metadata API that we've created in DBT Cloud. And so the metadata API will just serve up information about, what's going on in the warehouse, when were models last built, sort of user supplied descriptions about, the tables in the warehouse and the columns inside of those tables. And so we see some integrations with BI tools where, if you're going to do an analysis, it can surface information to you in line that says, hey, FYI, this data source hasn't loaded in 7 days, but you have an SLA of 24 hours. So that's really cool. We care a lot about putting that information in context where people are doing the work. So in the BI tool or data application, whatever it may be. That's been one really great integration point. The other big one that I only just teased at Coalesce, our community conference in December, is sort of this idea of the metrics layer is how we're talking about it. And this sort of underlying technology we're calling the Dbt Server. So it's sort of a programmatic interface into DBT's compilation engine. So the example to give is if you're a BI tool, you could build an integration where users say, I want to look at revenue by month across country and segment, whatever it is, for the last 6 months. And then you press run, that will send a query to DBT that gets compiled by the DBT compilation engine. So if you want to change your definition of revenue, you can do that inside of your DBT project and then automatically broadcast it to all the different data tools that you use.
That's cool.
We think that's going to be a really compelling product in and of itself for people that use DBT. But in terms of integration points, it really opens the door to have these much tighter integrations between DBT, the language, and BI tools that are intended to solve specific problems for specific types of customers.
Do you see a scenario where, because right now DBT is kind of overlaying SQL, right? So you've got that packages with SQL inside. Do you see a scenario beyond that where it'll be beyond SQL, where there's something else that it's encapsulating? Maybe in the future.
Yeah. Well, here's what's hard for me. We've always believed that SQL is the lingua franca of data. It has been for decades. It probably will be for decades.
Amen.
Amen.
At the same time, that being said, I think there is an opportunity to build a language. I said this. There's a very cool project. I think it's called PRQL. By
PRQL.
PRQL,
I've seen
Pipeline
it.
Relational Query Language, called Prequel.
Yep.
There's an issue. I commented on it yesterday, but it was about how do DBT and this thing fit together. And I put some thoughts in the issue. It's actually called Thoughts on DBT. Is the name of the issue. So
tell us about PRQL. What does that mean? What is it?
Yeah, I will not claim to be an expert, but I think the idea is it's a language built to compile to SQL, and so you can more effectively reuse code.
It's an abstraction layer away from SQL. So sort of if you think about ORMs in SQL Alchemy as an example, this is an abstraction layer away from that. So SQL, as much as Rich and I love it, is quite verbose. And so the challenge becomes to express something, especially if you've got multiple things that you're picking and then you're grouping. So it can become quite lengthy. And so this is an abstraction layer away from that, but it still generates the SQL that we love. It's easier.
Okay. It's a great summary. So I find the concept really compelling. We think of it in terms of TypeScript and JavaScript. JavaScript can run on every web browser, but there are benefits to having a language with strong typing and reasonable equality operations. So really the thought experiment for us is TypeScript is to JavaScript as this new language is to SQL. I think it's a really cool problem. It's one I'd be very excited to spend a lot of time on. But honestly, there's a lot of people kind of thinking about this right now, and they're doing cool stuff. And probably the first thing for me is to maybe better understand the state of the art.
Because and my reason for asking is because essentially you guys support, I would presume, pretty much any SQL database out there. Would I be wrong?
So the really cool thing is part of what goes in the open source realm for DBT is these database adapters, we call them. So DBT core doesn't actually know how to talk to any particular database,
Right.
but there are plugins for Snowflake and BigQuery and Redshift and Databricks
Yep.
and so on. And then the really cool thing is there are vendors that make data warehouses that have created their own plugins. So we've seen these from Materialize and Firebolt, and there's a couple others. And then there's also community.
So they're coming to you versus the community going to them.
Totally. And definitely individuals have built them for, I'd have to pull up the full list, but there's like a pretty long roster of databases that, I've never used, but that somebody wants to use with DBT. And so they built an integration. So it's one of the really cool things about the open source model is people can extend DBT. They can get it to work with their data warehouse. And oftentimes it's part of a migration from something like, say a legacy database into a more modern data warehouse. If you can actually model that data out with DBT on kind of your existing legacy database, then you have this transition target for when you move to Snowflake or BigQuery, Databricks, whatever it is. So that's pretty cool.
And part of the reason I asked too is the other day someone was showing us some Scala code which they wanted converted into SQL, and it looked very much like SQL. I mean, you could tell that the person who wrote it wanted to write Scala like SQL, and I thought, okay, yeah, we could convert this. There's going to be goofy Scala stuff in here that probably won't convert, but it got me thinking about auto generation but the packaging of code beyond SQL, and maybe that's something that you guys could encapsulate as well.
Yeah, the other thing that sticks out is just we saw a great convergence in kind of SQL support from the leading data warehouses out there.
Totally.
But now they're starting to branch out and actually.
Their proof point is non-SQL now. It's so weird. So it started out as like, hey, do you have SQL? They don't have SQL, and it's not. If they say it's SQL, it's not real SQL. How close to ANSI are you? And now it's like, can you do beyond SQL?
Help me do a logistic regression. Yeah. So we think it's cool. We think increasingly for DBT, we want to leverage this functionality and more than targeting a standard subset of SQL that works across every data warehouse, what we want to do is treat every database as a compiler target and get the most out of BigQuery and Snowflake and Databricks and Materialize and make sure that sort of people that are using those databases can use them for what they're really good at.
Yeah,
I love it. Well, cool. Back to my question. What is there any questions that I didn't ask? I want to ask where the future is, but like not every founder can explain what's going to happen next, just for competitive reasons. But is there I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there features coming out that are exciting?
Yeah, I mean, it's the metrics layer is like the thing. We did only tease it at Coalesce, and I'm only going to tease it again here. Okay. But we're really excited about beyond the technology itself, it really is this opportunity to just create consistency and help people adapt to the way their businesses are changing. So, we're about 200 people at Dbt Labs today. Yeah. And I remember when there were 15 of us and we had like 3 metrics and everybody knew what they were. But there are more than 3 metrics, there's 200 people. And so I'm sort of navigating some of this around our annual planning. Like, I think I want to change the definition of one of our metrics. And I'm just thinking, how do I get 200 people to internalize that we used to say that there was one definition,
it was this
but
way,
now
and
there's
now
a different one.
Yep.
And so I think that only gets harder as businesses grow. And I'm always excited about opportunities to dog food these things and use it internally and see how it works and learn from that experience. So I think the metrics layer is going to be a really big and exciting thing when we launch it. And
do you think it would go like kind of how Elation does, where they have a description for how something works, but then you have subscribers to that here's what it looks like. Here's how our description is. If it changes, the subscribers get notified of it or something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think awareness, also kind of part and parcel of that is discovery. So just like, what are the metrics that are out there that are verified is really important. The thing I would maybe recommend to everyone listening is we do these events that we call staging every quarter. And so our product team kind of gets up on stage and talks about what we've shipped and what's coming. And we'll probably have more to say about the metrics layer at the next staging event. So keep an eye out.
When is the next staging event?
It's a phenomenal question.
We'll look for it. Where would we find it?
Where would we find it? Definitely, we'll talk about it in the DBT Slack.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I find all.
Yeah.
DBT Slack. That's where I find the 101s and the demo days and all. There's all kinds of stuff in there. So
yeah, we skipped it last quarter because of Coalesce, our community conference. So it'll be about 6 months since the last one. So we have a lot of stuff to share. We'll make sure to shout far and wide about it.
Awesome. So a couple of last things. Where do they find you? People want to find DBT. How do they engage?
Amazing questions. I'm at Drew Banin, my full name on Twitter. Trying to tweet more. It's my New Year's resolution, for better or for worse. Definitely pop into the DBT Slack if you're not already in there. You can get there at I believe it's slack.getdbt.com. Let me confirm. I'm typing really fast.
Getdbt.slack.com. Yeah.
Getdbt.slack.com.
Yep.
Okay.
Both work. Yeah. And how do you learn more about DBT? If you're interested in open source at all, we're on GitHub. It's Dbt Labs / DBT Core is going to be the name of the repo. At GetDBT on Twitter. We love talking to folks in the community, whether you're using DBT already or considering it or not sure. Like, we'd love to hear from you. Awesome.
Well, Drew, this was excellent. I'm really happy that you were able to join us. This is I think you guys have something very exciting to for the market. And like I said, there's certain companies I call secret giants. You guys are one of them. SQL DBM is another one. They don't have 1,000 employees, but they're everywhere.
Yeah.
They're in every architecture. They're in every discussion. So I appreciate you guys joining us, and we'll put this one in for the books.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun talking to you all.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Drew.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Have an excellent